Welcome to the podcast on almost everything important. I'm cyclist and Professor Raymond Williams, actually Distinguished Emeritus Professor of the University of California and author of 17 books as of today, because today, actually, I'm speaking in March. In 2019, my 17th book just appeared in print in Colombia. But I'm not here to talk about books today that I've written or anybody else has written, actually. I'm here today to talk about the other half of my life that's taken up a good 25 years of my lifetime. Not all the time, those 25 years, but a good portion of my time during 25 years as an amateur cyclist. So I'm not talking about being a professional cyclist, and nor am I talking about just getting on a bicycle and riding around recreationally. I'm talking about 25 years of training to be a relatively competitive ultra distance amateur cyclist. That has included some races that were a high enough level that I was actually competing with professionals. Not that in reality I was actually competing well with the professionals. I was just competing with the amateurs and trying to complete the rugged race if it was a rugged one. But I just point that out to give you an idea of the basic kind of level that I competed at. But what I really want to do today is not talk very much, at least, about my own cycling, enough to give you some background. What I want to do today is introduce to you my spinning classes. So I'm planning on 2 podcasts and 2 YouTubes. For those of you that are listening to the podcast, we're actually making this simultaneously as a YouTube presentation. So I'm planning 2 podcasts with simultaneous YouTube recordings about my spinning, because I am actually employed part-time as a spinning instructor. I say employed part-time because I think actually there's no such thing as a full-time spinning instructor. I'm not sure what that would be. And I've never heard of anybody teaching 8 hours of spinning classes, for example. So I'm kind of assuming that everyone that teaches spinning classes is a part-time spinning instructor. In any case, that seems to be the case for a very large percentage of us, at the least. In my introduction, and first to myself and then to spinning, I wanted to say that I have 25 years of cycling and spinning experience, more or less parallel, actually, because early on, when I started riding bikes very non-competitively at a very beginning level, I made the innocent mistake, actually, of signing up for the Leadville 100 mountain bike race back in the days then, when all you had to do was know that you had to sign up January 1st, that it was going to fill up in a few days. I think back then it took about 3 days to fill up. By January 3rd, you'll have missed out. So for those innocents that were even more innocent than I was, that tried to go the week of the race or the month before the race and sign up, they would find out each year that it was actually filled up. Of course, in recent years, the competition for actually getting into the race has become much more difficult, and you actually nowadays have to be given the prominence of the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. You have to actually qualify to get into the race, and then I think they use a combination nowadays of qualifying to get in the race through doing other races, and then I think there is also some lottery system related to that. In any case, that as I said, was kind of a mistake in a way, but it's one of the better mistakes that I've made in my life. There's this cliche about learning from our mistakes, that we supposedly are more wise or better off, smarter, whatever, from our mistakes. And I actually didn't get any wisdom out of this mistake. I just it just kind of changed my life that I so innocently signed up for the Leadville 100 mountain bike race as a beginning mountain biker in my first year. So, as I said, I started spinning and cycling at more or less the same time in the early 1990s as I first started riding bikes, kind of around the block, actually, not much more. And then started training to ride a bike 100 miles because I had a good friend at the University of Colorado, a professor that used to ride his bike 100 miles once a year. And so I wanted to match that. I thought that was a noble goal, to ride a bicycle, basically just a hybrid bicycle with fat tires, 100 miles, which I did in, I don't know, I think a few months of training. But as I was doing that, along the way early on, I got myself a pretty nice specialized mountain bike and declared myself, as we all do, since I had a mountain bike and I rode it, I was a mountain biker by definition, right? But what I didn't really understand, because I was too innocent, was that I was very much a beginning mountain biker. I didn't have mountain biking skills, and I didn't have the kind of cardiovascular system to do very much mountain biking at all. But since I didn't know that, I signed up for this race, kind of in the spirit, this all-American spirit that we have of signing up for a marathon with the intention of, quote unquote, getting in shape, right? How many millions of Americans have signed up for a marathon so they'll get in shape? And then you signed up, you paid your money, and now you have this commitment. You tell your friends, I'm going to get in shape and run a marathon, and then you do it, right? We all know people who've done it, and maybe you've done it yourself. That was exactly the spirit in which I signed up for the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, without knowing that I had no business signing up, independent of my intentions. That's a race that expert cyclists sign up for, and then from there they start training to complete the race. And so, but when I found out early on, I started to realize I was in, a pretty demanding scenario doing this Leadville 100 mountain bike race. If you don't happen to be a mountain biker, you're one of my spinning students listening to this podcast, for example, or an academic that's eavesdropping into my cycling life, and you've never heard of the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. It's considered the toughest mountain bike race in the United States. In recent years, that could be disputed because there are several really tough mountain bike races, but it's not common to race a mountain bike 100 years. And it's not common at all to start a 100-mile mountain bike race at 10,000 feet. And it's not common in any mountain bike race to climb a total of 14,000 vertical feet, in the process of this race. So it was a very, very difficult race. And once I started realizing that, then I started, I think people told me, as I asked what I should be doing to train, someone suggested that I take a spinning class, which was the new cool thing in Boulder, Colorado. I like to say sometimes to my classes, it was the coolest thing to arrive at Boulder since marijuana, because it was basically the newest thing from California. I remember we had these California-trained, California-certified spinning instructors. They were certified in the patent called spinning. They weren't just any kind of indoor cyclists. They were patented. They had been trained in the patented spinning system. And as a matter of fact, I had an excellent instructor. I was so lucky as I look back on it, because I had excellent spinning classes. And I also, by chance, had a very appropriate, helpful personal trainer, because this personal trainer took the time. I remember she was a young girl. I'm sure she was, not a very experienced personal trainer. She was in her probably early 20s, but she took the time to consult. I saw her doing it actually, on what the appropriate training would be for endurance. And she came up with a system I've never seen duplicated since. I tell people about it, but no one's ever told me about this. And that was that for endurance, she had me doing 33 repetitions 3 times. The classic 3 times. But if you listen to people that do weight training, they're usually going to say something like, use weights that you can lift 6 to 8 times. And then, that would be 6 to 8 times with relatively heavy weights. And so if you can do more than 6 to 8 repetitions, then increase the weight. That's the classic take on weight training. But she came up with this system of doing 33 repetitions that I've continued doing the rest of my life. When I have the time, that my ideal set of repetitions, because I became an endurance cyclist, and that's the short version, was that her system was 3 sets of 33. So we lightened the weights until I could do 33 sets. So I remember in several of the exercises I was using about 60 pounds, for example, whereas people doing weights would have been using, who knows, double, triple, quadruple that. Anyway, I feel very fortunate because I took these spinning classes that were very, I remember I only have positive memories of these spinning classes. I don't remember any substitute spinning teachers that were less qualified or less able to teach the classes. And I remember actually my spinning instructor was the wife of a star quarterback at the University of Colorado by the name of Detmer. So people used to give me a bad time when I would speak so highly of my spinning class and claim that I just wanted to watch this attractive wife of this Detmer, the quarterback. The truth of the matter is, it was a spinning class with a lot of variety, and most importantly for me, I think, well, there were a couple of things. One of them is that it taught me a lot about RPM. I think like a lot of beginning mountain bikers, my RPM was very slow. I probably on my own, until I went to spinning class, had never gone beyond 50 RPMs, I think. And I see this just around town in Southern California. You see kind of novice cyclists out there, and they're pedaling so slowly, and particularly when they're going uphill. And I want to say, spin it out, shift your gears. I'm tempted to roll down my window, but I don't want to harass them. But in any case, I was exactly like that. Then I learned how fast you could, and of course she built up my cardio too in that class. But even more importantly, she got me off the saddle, because I don't know how many years I might have ridden my bike until I had the muscle system in my core and all of that, that complex set of muscles that you use when you jump off your seat, pedal, and then go back down. That's, as beginning cyclists find out, that's not easy in the muscular sense. It's not as easy on a bike as it is on a spinning bike, of course, on a stationary bike. But in my case, I found that once I learned how to jump with skill and strength on a stationary bike, definitely facilitated doing that much more and knowing when to do it. And I got past spinning, for example, took me out of that pain in the lower back of steep climbs that I had been suffering. So anyway, I think I've carried on more than I wanted to about my early years of cycling and spinning in Boulder, Colorado in the early 90s. So after that, I came out to Southern California and eventually learned that the key to ultra distance training, even for a mountain bike race, is actually a combination of spinning and road bikes. Because on a road bike, as in spinning, you can be more continual with your cardio training. That's not that common in any form of riding mountain bikes. Although I eventually developed long distance training habits on mountain bikes that mountain bikers typically, had never even heard of. For example, riding my mountain bike 100 miles from Huntington Beach. My last big training ride for the Leadville 100 became riding my mountain bike 100 miles from Huntington Beach to the top of Onyx Summit above Big Bear. So that's 100 miles, and it's pretty much a slow climb. It's not a great simulation of the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, but I felt it was, in training terms, a logical precedent, because I figured if I couldn't ride my mountain bike 100 miles, on cement and on uphill, I certainly wasn't going to be in the kind of condition to ride the bike 100 miles going up and down constantly from 10,000 to 14,000 feet or whatever it was, 10,000 to 13,900 or something like that. So that was the background to my cycling that led me into some ultra distance training that I might and events that I might make some reference to later on. So let's jump into my spinning classes. My next podcast about that with this YouTube, I'm gonna do a just short 3-minute demonstration of my spinning classes, maybe, but and talk visually more about about what happens. But the first thing I do is go into the first 3 things that I do in my spinning class. Is lead them into a warm-up with gears at 6 to 11 and RPM at 75, 85. And then as we start that warm-up, I indicate that throughout the class, what I'll be doing is indicating a range of gears and a range of RPM. So I'm not assuming that, first of all, you ride a bicycle the same way I do. I'm not assuming that your condition is the same as mine. I'm not assuming that your muscle structure is the same as mine. I'm not assuming that we have a similar weight. And all of those factors will determine what would be the exact best gear and RPM for you. I do guide much more definitively the RPM because that's something all of us can strive for in a similar way much sooner than we can even appropriately try to be all using the same gears. So I'm going to I give the students a range of gears starting out at 6 to 11 for just our warm-up at 75, 85 RPMs. From there, I take them kind of brusquely, actually. We kind of jump into some jumps. And I feel like this is just a great way to start the real class for a couple of reasons. The main one, it puts us all in tune with the fact that, hey, we're in an intense spinning class. We're not going to sit around very long. We're only going to sit around as long on that saddle as long as we need to warm up. So I'm going to give you a decent chance to warm up, and then we're going to jump to work. And so I do these jumps to start out with some, appropriate music, lively music, pretty fast, and then it works. I think I have the attention of the class, and I have the class working together right away. And I feel that this is just a great way to start the class, and it seems to work pretty well. From there, we pick up the speed a little bit on seated flat and do what I call a second, slightly more intense warm-up at 90 to 95 RPMs. So this provides a little bit of kicking back and looking at themselves, and I remind them to sort of check in with their body at that point, check in with their full circles, check in with their upper body, and concentrating more on right away now in this more intense warm-up, and concentrating on keeping their body stationary as they're doing this seated, flat, slightly more intense warm-up. So from there, we go into about 11 or 12 songs in each of my classes. It could be 10 to 13, I guess, depending on the length of the songs. I'm sure everyone that does a spinning class thinks their music is great. I do get good feedback on mine. I think it would be a cliche to say my music is great. What it is for sure, it's diverse. Almost all my classes, it's a diverse playlist, because after all, with a range of ages in the classes, you pretty much need, I feel, to reach out to everybody so that, first of all, not all the music is repugnant for anybody, and also secondarily that at least there are some songs they actually like in the class, that they really like. So there's some from the 2000s, some from the 90s, a lot from the 80s, and some from the 70s, and I think all my playlists that I would have that combination. Then I have some specialty playlists that I'm not going to go into them because I think they might distract you a bit, but I have about 10 playlists with a few songs that kind of overlap on almost all of them. So I guess those are what I find to be the best music for the three ranges of this three speed ranges, let's call it, of my spinning classes. So beyond that, all I'm going to say is that it's very structured. I'm going to tell the class at the beginning, in most cases, what we're up to. In probably indefinitely in the majority of the cases, I'm going to tell them this class is about doing 3 sets of jumps, 3 sets of standing climbs, and 3 sets of sprints or intervals, sprints in the form of intervals. So I tell them that, and that's what we do, more or less in order, cyclical order, but not exactly, depending on the particular class that it happens to be. So the other thing that I tell them, in addition to 3, 3, and 3, is that I do have a more aggressive one that I save for classes that are very well trained and really, really want a tough workout. I have one that skips that second warm up, and we managed to do 4, 4, and 4. So that's a very intense class. And then I also tell them, in addition to that, as far as what we're doing, that, and this is key to my spinning classes, I'm not the only person that does this, but it does put me in a minority, I think, of at least of the spinning classes that I see around Southern California, is I tell them our recovery, when we're sort of just spinning things out between whatever it is we're doing, between songs and transitions and after doing certain movements, I tell them we're going to maintain an active recovery RPM of 90. So I work at that a lot with them. I stay on that 90. And not all the students in the class follow it. Excuse me. Thank you. Not everybody keeps up to the 90 RPM, but I think it's a good goal. I think it's a noble goal. And some of the feedback that I get from the class, the feedback that I get most obviously is that I see people perspiring by midway through the class, which I think is like important, right? If people aren't sweating, I don't think it's a good spinning class. But the feedback that I've gotten that I really like is that some of my students have said that my classes are like a road ride, and I think that's the reason. They're very continual. We don't stop and go, we keep going. The least that we're doing is sitting on our bike and spinning at 90 RPMs. So then I have one little slightly off the record, off the wall thing that I do once a month in my classes on an average. So this is not a typical class, but I like to break things up a little bit, because I think that in all forms of training, we just need to mix things up a bit. Once our bodies get too comfortable at doing what we're doing, we need to mix things up and make our bodies uncomfortable, a little bit more uncomfortable than they have been. So the way I do that is I have once a month simulated bike rides. So it could be, I did one tonight actually in one of my classes. They rode my first simulated ride. It involved a very long 17-minute climb, which is not typical of a spinning class. I'm not going to say too much more about that since it's not typical. I don't want to sort of distract you in an inappropriate way. So I just want to close as far as what I do in spinning classes by telling you a little bit about my constituency. We all know, actually those of us that teach spinning might know at least, that there are basically 3 groups of people that come to the spinning classes, and I think I try to kind of direct my spinning classes with an awareness of these 3 groups. I would put at the top of these groups the performance riders, the performance athletes. That would be the cyclists that are training for something, the triathletes that are training for something, and the serious club riders. And I should also include other athletes that don't have anything to do with these disciplines, but that use spinning as a part of their cardiovascular training. So these are the people I relate to best, frankly. These are the people the cyclists, the triathletes, the club riders, the athletes in training, are the people that come up to me after class most frequently to get to know me and to tell me what they're doing, and because they can tell from my classes that I have a lot in common with them. I am a cyclist. I have competed. I have trained. I have been in, actually, let's see, about 6 different bicycle clubs during those 25 years. So we have commonalities. Of course, they're checking. They want to see exactly what my credentials are, sort of, or they want to see how much I might have in common with them. So I think these people, this first group, definitely likes my spinning classes because I'm gonna challenge them and I understand what they're doing. There's a second group that might be called the rhythm spinners, and I think that they're comfortable in my classes too because I ride rhythmically most of the time. I try to ride rhythmically all the time. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but I feel that it works out most of the time because my playlist is, of course, predictable. So I don't do as much work as some clubs in LA do for the rhythm riders to make this into a simulation of a club dance, or a club bar. I know some spinning instructors do create the club atmosphere. I think some of my students, because of the music, nevertheless do feel like they're at a dance. By the way, I dance West Coast swing and salsa, so those are that's my music credentials. And I've been listening to music for a long time. And I'm interested in music in a very unprofessional way. I don't know a lot about music other than I listen to it all the time. So now I listen to it in a different way. I listen to music only to see which of the songs I hear are appropriate for something to do in my spinning classes. Then there's a third group that shows up to spinning classes, which are kind of muscle builders. I call them the grinders. These are the people that like to go and put up big gears and push really hard and build muscles while they're on a bike. So I feel that they're kind of under these kinds of individuals that come to spinning classes. And I guess there's some instructors that do this too. But the people that come to spinning classes that want to grind, I think have been influenced a lot by the discipline of weightlifting and weight training, and think they need to devastate their muscles under heavy pressure to build them. I think they also fantasize that if they have big leg muscles, they're going to be better cyclists. I don't actually know. If you look at the Tour de France and professional racers, of course they have muscular legs, but the size of the muscles per se actually aren't that impressive in most successful cyclists. So I think this is more in the world of fantasy, this idea of grinding, gym fantasy, I should say, weightlifting fantasy. So I feel that my job is to work with them on showing them indirectly, by the way I structure the classes and what we do, that this isn't actually much of a muscle building class. I do at least one seated climb in each of my classes that's explicitly a muscle building exercise. I do a few other things in which I talk about muscles, but I feel that the job of the spinning instructor is to lead the muscle builders into understanding that this is primarily a cardiovascular exercise, whether it's indoor or outdoor cycling, and the road to success isn't actually primarily building large looking muscles. So that's what I have for this website. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the stuff that I did. One of the stories I'm going to close with is something I try to throw into my classes once in a while, particularly if it's a class in which there's a lot of newcomers, because out here in California, I've been teaching classes that are my own regular classes at the same time that I serve as a substitute for other classes. And so when I'm a substitute, and sometime in my own classes, I notice there are a lot of newcomers, and I like to point out the power of this exercise. And the power of this exercise for me, the most blatant example is the fact that in those early 90s, when I was riding that hybrid bike, I thought a bike ride was 5 miles. And I would proudly go out with actually my partner, and we would ride a 2.5 miles out to a pond, eat a sandwich, and then come back. And then lay on the sofa and say, now that was a ride, wasn't it? Now we're getting into it. We actually thought that was a bike ride. It was technically a bike ride, but as you can see, it wasn't much of a bike ride. So I like to point out that from the early 90s, when I started those 5-mile bike rides, to the late 90s and early 2000s, within 9 years, I had gone from the ability to ride a bike for 5 miles to the ability to ride a bike 508 miles. So that has nothing to do with my own athletic ability. I'm actually a very average athlete. So it's not a story about my my ability. It's a story about what training on a spinning bike and a bicycle can do. That's what I like to emphasize in my classes when I tell the story to the newcomers. So that's my story. I'll elaborate on the 508-mile race and the Leadville 100. By the way, this is one of my shirts with the Leadville 100 mountain bike race logo on it. So I wear this stuff around still, even though I couldn't really do any of these events myself today. I might be able to train for some of them, but most of them I couldn't do them no matter how much I trained at my current level of physical fitness and age. In any case, this is the story, and I'll look forward to talking to you again about my spinning classes specifically in a future podcast and a future YouTube. Thank you very much.